Hi everyone, we are going to start a new topic today. This topic is called solving quadratics by square roots. Okay, so the last few methods we did graphing, we did factoring. Now we're doing solving by square roots. Some key things here is it always needs to be in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Our first step is to isolate the x value. Then we're going to take the square root of both sides. And then we need to be sure that we set x equal to our positive solution and x also equal to our negative solution. Okay, so x always equals plus or minus our answer. Okay. Now just let's refresh your memory a little bit with what we know about square roots, okay? If I take the square root of 64, that's what two numbers multiplied by each other to equal 64. That would be 8. I could also take my calculator and do square root. Wrong button, sorry. Square root of 64, okay, is 8. If you don't have a calculator, there are tons of online calculators that will do that for you. To go simpler, square root of 4 would be 2. Square root of 16 would be 4. Okay, we can keep going. So it's just whatever number, this number has to multiply by itself to get that number in the square root. Okay, we've done these many times. If you're having trouble, I can also upload a table to help you with some square root facts. One really important thing to remember is that if we get a negative underneath our square root, the answer is no real solution. So if it looks like this, x equals the square root of a negative 2, there's no real answer that we can do there. Okay, so let's go over these 5 problems. We're going to solve each of these using square roots. So the first thing I want to do is isolate x. So if I zoom in here to this problem, get nice and close for you. I want to get this x by itself. So what I'm going to do, this 3 is multiplying by the x squared, so I'm going to divide by 3. Okay, so now I have x squared equals, and I do 75 divided by 3 in my calculator, that's 25. Okay, next step is to take the square root of both sides. So the square root of 25 is 5. Okay, so if I take the square root of both sides, the x and the squared and the square root cancel. I'm left with the square root of 25, which is 5. However, my last step is to be sure that I account plus and minus for my solution. So this should be plus or minus 5. So I actually have the solution x equals 5 and x equals negative 5. So this graph would cross the x-axis at negative 5 and 5. B is a little more complicated. In fact, I think the rest of these are a lot more complicated in the sense that it doesn't come out to a perfect square. This value was a perfect square. 25 is a perfect square. The rest of these problems are not perfect squares, so we have to use our calculator. So to start to get x by itself, I would add this 6 first. So I have 24x squared equals 6. Then I'm going to have to move that 24 over by dividing because that 24 is multiplying by the x. Now at this point we have 6 over 24. 6 goes into 24 4 times, so we really have 1/4. Okay, so this is kind of ugly. If I take the square root of both sides, I get x is plus or minus the square root of 1/4. That's kind of ugly. We can leave our answer like that, or I can do this in my calculator. Second square root, 0.25 is the same as 1/4, and I get 0.5. Okay, so that means that x equals positive 0.5 and negative 0.5, which is the same as a half. So those would be my two answers. So that's how we can find our actual answers in decimal form if you ever needed an exact answer. On a test or quiz, normally when we were in school, I would accept something just like this. But because we're using online, we are probably going to have to find the exact for a lot of these. Okay. The first thing we should always make sure we do is get this in standard form. Ax squared plus bx equals plus c equals 0. This one's a little wishy-washy. So let's first move this 6 over here, make it a little less confusing, or we can just attack it right away. So you could set this up like this to make it look a little less stressful for you, okay? If you do that, you would be subtracting 6 from both sides. Either way, you do the same move. This would be negative 24. Divide by negative 4 on both sides. We get x squared equals, I'm dividing a negative by a negative, so that's actually going to give me a positive. Okay. Now, is 6 a perfect square? No. So when I take the square root of both sides, I'm going to just be left with plus or minus square root of 6. Like I said, I'm okay with you leaving the answer like that. Because we're using online, we should find the exact just in case. The square root of 6 is 2.4. So I would say x equals 2.4, x equals negative 2.4. You have to have those two answers. All right, this one here, my first move would be to add 10. That gives me 8x squared equals 224. And then I divide by 8. That would give me 28. If I take the square root of both sides, 28 is not a perfect square. So I would once again need to use my calculator. So I'm going to do the square root of 28. That gives me about 5.3. So I would have x equals 5.3 and x equals negative 5.3. All right, last problem here, super important. If I note here I want to isolate x, I got to subtract this 16. Then I divide this 2. X squared equals negative 8. Now, if I take the square root of both sides, I'm doing the square root of a negative number. That's a no-no. So up here I said if we take square root of a negative, there's no real solution. Okay, so you can't give me a full answer here. There is no real solution. You can't take the square root of a negative. If you do, we get an imaginary number, which we won't really get into in Algebra 1. But for now, we just say that's not a real solution. All right, if you guys have any questions, I am available 11 to 12 for office hours. Have a great day.